Of what use the cruel code, the frightful punishments, the curses, the falsehoods, and the miracles of this ignorant and infamous book? And what is there in the book of Numbers, with its sacrifices and water of jealousy, with its shewbread and spoons, its kids and fine flour, its oils and candlesticks, its cucumbers, onions, and manna, to assist and instruct mankind? What interest have we in the rebellion of Korah, the water of separation, the ashes of a red heifer, the brazen serpent, the water that followed the people uphill and down for 40 years, and the inspired donkey of the prophet Balaam? Have these absurdities and cruelties, these childish, savage superstitions helped to civilize the world? Is there anything in Joshua, with its wars, its murders and massacres, its swords dripping with the blood and murders and babes, with the blood of mothers and babes, its tortures, maimings, and mutilations, its fraud and fury, its hatred and revenge, calculated to improve the world? Does not every chapter shock the heart of a good man? Is it a book to be read by children? The book of Joshua is as merciless as famine, as ferocious as the heart of a wild beast. It is a history, a justification, a sanctification of nearly every crime. The book of Judges is about the same, nothing but war and bloodshed, the horrible story of Jael and Sisera, of Gideon and his trumpets and pitchers, of Jephthah and his daughter, whom he murdered to please Jehovah. Here we find the story of Samson, in which a sun god is changed to a Hebrew giant. Read this book of Joshua. Read the slaughter of women, of wives, of mothers, and babes. Read its impossible miracles, its ruthless crimes, and all done according to the commands of Jehovah. And tell me whether this book is calculated to make us forgiving, generous, and loving. I admit that the story of Ruth is in some respects a beautiful and touching story, that it is naturally told, and that her love for Naomi was deep and pure. But in the matter of courtship, we should hardly advise our daughters to follow the example of Ruth. Still, we must remember that Ruth was a widow. Is there anything worth reading in the first and second books of Samuel? Ought a prophet of God to hew a captured king in pieces? Is the story of the ark, its capture and return, of importance to us? Is it possible that it was right, just, and merciful to kill 50,000 men because they had looked into a box? Of what use to us are the wars of Saul and David, the stories of Goliath and the witch of Endor? Why should Jehovah have killed Uzzah for putting forth his hand to steady the ark, and forgiven David for murdering Uriah and stealing his wife? According to Samuel, David took a census of the people. This excited the wrath of Jehovah, and as a punishment, he allowed David to choose 7 years of famine, a flight of 3 months from pursuing enemies, or 3 days of pestilence. David, having the confidence in God, chose the 3 days of pestilence, and thereupon God, the compassionate, on account of the sin of David, killed 70,000 innocent men. Under the same circumstances, what would a devil have done? Is there anything in the first and second Kings that suggests an idea of inspiration? When David is dying, he tells his son Solomon to murder Joab, not to let his whore head go down to the grave in peace. With his last breath, he commands his son to bring down the head of Shimei to grave with blood. Having uttered these merciful words, the good David, the man after God's heart, slept with his fathers. Was it necessary to inspire the man who wrote the history of the building of the temple, the story of the visit of the Queen of Sheba, or to tell the story of Solomon's wives? What care we for the withering of Jeroboam's hand, the prophecy of Jehu, or the story of Elijah and the ravens? Can we believe that Elijah brought flames from heaven, or that he went at last to paradise in a chariot of fire? Can we believe in the multiplication of the widow's oil by Elisha, that an army was smitten with blindness, or that an axe floated in the water? Does it civilize us to read about the beheading of the 70 sons of Ahab, the putting out of the eyes of Zedekiah, and the murder of his sons? Is there one word in 1st and 2nd Kings calculated to make us better men? 1st and 2nd Chronicles is but a retelling of what is told in 1st and 2nd Kings. The same old stories, a little left out, a little added, but in no respect made better or worse. The book of Ezra is of no importance. He tells us that Cyrus, king of Persia, issued a proclamation for building a temple at Jerusalem, and that he declared Jehovah to be the real and only God. Nothing could be more absurd. Ezra tells us about the return from captivity, the building of the temple, the dedication, a few prayers, and this is all. The book is of no importance, of no use. Nehemiah is about the same, only it tells of the building of the wall. The complaints of people about taxes, a list of those who returned from Babylon, a catalog of those who dwelt at Jerusalem, and the dedication of the wall. Nothing, not a word in Nehemiah is worth reading. Then comes the book of Esther. In this we are told that King Ahasuerus was intoxicated, that he sent for his queen Vashti to come and show herself to him and his guests. Vashti refused to appear. This maddened the king, and he ordered that from every province the most beautiful girls should be sent before him, that he might choose one in the place of Vashti. Among others was brought Esther, a Jewess. She was chosen and became the wife of the king. Then a gentleman by the name of Haman wanted to have all the Jews killed, and the king, not knowing that Esther was of that race, signed a decree that all the Jews should be killed. Through the efforts of Mordecai and Esther, the decree was annulled and the Jews were saved. Haman prepared a gallows on which to have Mordecai hanged, but the good Esther so managed matters that Haman and his 10 sons were hanged on the gallows that Haman had built, and the Jews were allowed to murder more than 75,000 of the king's subjects. This is the inspired story of Esther. In the book of Job, we find some elevated sentiments, some sublime and foolish thoughts, something of the wonder and sublimity of nature, the joys and sorrows of life, but the story is infamous. Some of the Psalms are good, many are indifferent, a few are infamous. In them are mingled the vices and virtues. There are verses that elevate, verses that degrade. There are prayers for forgiveness and revenge. In the literature of the world, there is nothing more heartless, more infamous than the 109th Psalm. In the Proverbs, there is much shrewdness, many pithy and prudent maxims, many wise sayings. The same ideas are expressed in many ways. The wisdom of economy and silence, the dangers of vanity and idleness. Some are trivial, some are foolish, and many are wise. The Proverbs are not generous, not altruistic. Sayings to the same effect are found among all nations. Ecclesiastes is the most thoughtful book in the Bible. It was written by an unbeliever, a philosopher, an agnostic. Take out the interpolations, and it is in accordance with the thought of the 19th century. In this book are found the most philosophic and poetic passages in the Bible. After crossing the desert of death and crime, after reading the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, it is delightful to reach this grove of palms called the Song of Solomon. A drama of love, of human low, a poem without Jehovah, a poem born of the heart and true to the divine instincts of the soul. I sleep, but my heart waketh. Isaiah is the work of several. Its swollen words, its vague imagery, its prophecies and curses, its ravings against kings and nations, its laughter at the wisdom of man, its hatred of joy, have not the slightest tendency to increase the well-being of man. In this book is recorded the absurdest of all miracles. The shadow on the dial is turned back 10 degrees in order to satisfy Hezekiah that Jehovah will add 15 years to his life. In this miracle, the world, turning from west to east at the rate of more than 1,000 miles an hour, is not only stopped, but made to turn the other way until the shadow on the dial went back 10 degrees. Is there in the whole world an intelligent man or woman who believes this impossible falsehood?